I said her name on a Tuesday morning in April, said it clearly without hesitation, while looking the magistrate's man directly in the eye. I told him I had seen her dolphins. I told him I had felt her presence at night, pressing down on me in the dark. Every word of it, a lie. Every word of it, deliberate. He wrote it all down without looking up. When he finished, he capped his ink, nodded once, and left through the door he came in. I stood at the window and looked through the glass at the clay pot on our windowsill next door. Lavender, rosemary, something with small yellow flowers whose name I'd never learned, still growing, tilting toward the morning light the way they always did. They had no information about what I had just done to the woman who tended them. I had handed her to a court that had not acquitted a single person it had tried that year. I knew this, and I did not call the man back. Her name was Hannah. She had lived in the house next to mine for 11 years. I knew which days she baked by the smell that came through the wall between us. She gave bundles of her dried herbs to anyone who asked. Half the village had a lavender hanging somewhere in their home. She remembered the names of other people's children. She showed up without being asked when someone was sick. She was the kind of woman so woven into the texture of daily life that you stop noticing her the way you stop noticing the shape of your own house, until the day it changes and you can't stop noticing it. She was 51 years old. She had never once done anything to deserve what I did to her. To understand how I got to that window, you need to understand what kind of place Salem Village was in the winter of 1692. 500 people on hard New England farmland that gave back less than you put into it. Long winters. A God who in the faith these people held completely and without question was watchful and demanding, and whose silence on any given day was either approval or a punishment being prepared. And a village that had been fracturing for years. Two factions fighting over the minister. Families that had farmed next to each other for decades who had stopped speaking. Old grudges carried politely to church on Sunday and carried home again unchanged. I was a widow. My husband Thomas had died the previous winter, 9 days from health to burial, the fever taking him faster than I could adjust to the idea of losing him. He left death, not enormous ones, but persistent ones, the kind that required careful management and that left me in a specific position that widows in small communities understand without having to be told. Everything I had in that village rested on reputation. Clean, quiet, church-going, the kind of woman a community takes care of rather than turns against. In a place like Salem, that was not a social concern. It was survival. The distance between a woman the village protected and a woman it turned on was thinner than most people standing on the comfortable side of it ever needed to measure. I understood it precisely. I had been maintaining it carefully for 2 years since Thomas died, and then, in January of 1692, the minister's daughter began to convulse. Her name was Betty Parrish. She was 9 years old, the daughter of the village's own minister, a man named Samuel Parrish, and her feet began without warning and without explanation. Her body going rigid, her back hacking, sounds coming from her that no child should make. The doctor was called. He examined her thoroughly and found nothing physically wrong with her body. What he said after the examination moved through Salem in hours. He said that the child was bewitched. That word, in a Puritan community in 1692, that word was not a metaphor or a figure of speech. These people believed completely the way you believe in code when you're standing in it, that the devil was active in the world, working through human servants to corrupt their community from inside. Bewitchment was not a medical mystery, it was an attack. And an attack meant someone in this village was responsible for it. Within days, the minister's niece, a girl named Abigail Williams, began showing the same symptoms. Then both girls, started naming names. The first names were women the village would not go to war over. Tituba, the minister's unenslaved servant, a woman from Barbados with no power and no one to defend her. When they accused her, she confessed, not just confessed, but gave them everything they wanted and more. She described the devil. She described the book he carried with names signed in it. She named other women she claimed she had seen signing it. Her confession was the spark that lit everything that followed, because confessing meant naming others, and naming others meant the circle of accusation had a reason to keep expanding. After Tituba came a woman named Sarah Good, a beggar who moved between households, asking for food and shelter. Nobody was going to argue on Sarah Good's behalf. Her loss cost the village nothing it valued. After Sarah Good came an elderly bedridden woman who hadn't been well enough to attend church in over a year. Easy, expendable, the kind of woman a community can sacrifice without feeling it. But watching those first accusations move through Salem taught me something I hadn't fully understood before. Fire doesn't stay where you set it. It finds its own direction, and it moves at its own speed, and it does not ask you before it does. By February, the accusations had spread beyond the obvious targets. Names were being said that surprised people, respected people, people who had done nothing differently than they had done their entire lives. I went to one of the hearings in March, not because I had to, because I needed to understand what I was dealing with. The meeting house was packed. People stood against every wall. The magistrate overseeing the proceedings was a man named John Hathorne, not a judge in any ordinary sense, but a community leader given extraordinary authority by the fear that had taken hold of the village. He sat at the front with settled certainty of a man who had made up his mind before sitting down and was now simply building the official record that confirmed what he already knew. The women being accused stood in the center of the room. The girls who had made the accusations sat to one side. I watched Hathorne question a woman I had known for 6 years. She answered carefully and clearly, the way you answer when you believe that if you explain yourself well enough, you will be understood. Hathorne asked her why she was hurting these children, not whether she was hurting them. Why? She said she was not hurting anyone. Both girls immediately began to scream. They retreated in their seats, clutching at their necks and arms, crying out that her spirit was in the room at that very moment, tormenting them, while she stood there in plain sight, doing nothing at all. Hathorne wrote something down. She was taken away 20 minutes later. I walked home through the cold and I stood in my kitchen and I thought, not about that woman, not about whether any of this was right, about the mechanics of what I had just watched, how it worked, what it required to keep going, what could stop it, and what clearly could not. Obviously, innocence could not stop it. I had just watched innocence stand in that room and try its best and get recorded as further evidence of guilt. The girl screamed, Hathorne wrote, and that was the end of innocence as a defense. The only safe position in Salem that spring was not to be accused, and the only way that makes certain you were not accused was to be the one doing the accusing. I didn't make a decision that evening. I told myself I didn't, but the thought moved into the house with me, and it didn't leave, and some part of me already knew what I was going to do. The same way you sometimes know the end of a sentence before you finish saying it. The weeks that followed had the slow quality of a door swinging shut. The choice still technically open, but the movement in one direction. More names emerged. More women I recognized were led away. The circle of accusation widened week by week, and with every new name, the question of whether I was inside it or outside it became harder to answer with confidence. Then the men came to my door, 2 of them, on a Tuesday in late April. The quality of the knock before I opened, deliberate, patient, dropped my stomach before I saw their face. They came in more than their boots. They didn't apologize for it. They were asking about a woman already under suspicion. Had I noticed anything unusual about her? Felt anything in her presence? Witnessed anything that might be relevant? I said I had noticed nothing. One of them wrote this down. The other looked up slowly from his paper and said, almost as an aside, that my own name had come up in connection with recent events. Not as an accusation, just mentioned. He set the word between us on my kitchen table and left it there. I knew exactly what mentioned meant. I had been in that meeting house. I had watched the path from mentioned to accused take less than a week. I had watched the path from accused to convicted take 1 hearing. I had watched what came after conviction happen on a hill outside the village to women who had maintained their innocence to the end. The two men were watching me. My hands had gone cold inside my sleeves. And then something happened that I've spent 50 years trying to describe accurately. Not a decision the way decisions feel when you make them deliberately. Something deeper than that. The part of a person that is purely concerned with surviving, that acts before it consults the rest of you. I said it was something I'd been afraid to come forward about. The words came out level and clear. The voice of a woman executing a decision, which is exactly what I was. I was not panicking. I was choosing in the coldest and most functional part of myself, and the choice had been made before I opened my mouth. I said Anna's name. I described things I had not seen, using the language I had heard other accusers using the hearings I attended, the nighttime visitations, the spectral shape at the foot of my bed, the pressure in the dark. I had listened carefully in that meeting house. I had paid attention to which details that made Hathorne lean forward. I used all of it. The men wrote everything down. When they left, I went to the window and looked at her hair parts, the lavender still growing, still tilting toward the light, patient and ordinary, and completely uninformed about what I had just done to the hands that tended it. I stood there for a long time. I did not call the men back. The trials that began in June moved with a speed that left no room for second thoughts. Not the court's second thoughts, and by design not anyone else's either. The first woman tried was convicted and hanged within 5 days of a verdict. The machinery didn't pause. More names moved through June and July. More women tried. More convictions. The jail in the nearby town so full by midsummer that the conditions inside it were killing people before the court could. And then they convicted a woman named Rebecca Nurse. She was 71 years old. She had lived in Salem her entire life and was so universally regarded as a woman of good character and godly conduct that even in the middle of all of this, even with the fear running at full force through the community, the jury came back with an accuser on the first vote. The magistrate sent them back to reconsider. They came back with a conviction. She was hanged in July. After Rebecca Nurse, something shifted in the village. A collective understanding, felt rather than spoken, that the word innocent had lost whatever protective power it once carried. If you could be convicted, anyone could be convicted, and the only question was whether your name had been said yet. I attended the hanging, stood in the crowd on a hill outside the village in a hot July morning, and watched and felt the thing in my chest that had been growing since April felt heavier, and went home and made supper and went to bed. This is the part that is hardest to explain to anyone who wasn't inside it. Not the decision to say Anna's name that I can trace, or follow its terrible logic from the cold hands in my kitchen to the word mentioned sitting on my table, to everything I had watched in that meeting room. What I cannot explain is everything after, the continuation, getting up every morning, going to church on Sunday, nodding to people in the road who nodded back, being thanked quietly by people, separately for the courage I had shown in coming forward when I knew what I knew. I accepted the thanks. I nodded in the road. Anna sat in the jail through June and July and August while I walked past her windowsill every morning. The herbs kept growing. The lavender put out no shoots through the summer heat. The small yellow flowers opened and closed each day with the light, patient and indifferent, waiting for hands that were not coming back to them. I told myself things during those months I no longer remember precisely, only that they were the kind of things you see when looking clearly at what you have done is not something you have decided you can survive. Our trial was in August, the courtroom packed and hairless in the summer heat, the smell of it thick and close. Anna was brought in through a side door, and I saw immediately what ferment in that jail had done to her face. The weight gone from her cheekbones, her skin pulled close to the bone beneath it, but not what was underneath the bone, the directness, the quality of a woman who said what she meant and meant what she said. That was still there, worn at the edges, but present. She looked around the courtroom slowly when they brought her in, the way a person looks when trying to see a situation in its entirety before it closes around them. Her eyes moved across the packed gallery, across the magistrate's table, across the girls seating on one side, already shifting in their seats, with the readiness of people who already know their role. Then her eyes found my face, and it stopped. I looked at her. I had decided before I came that morning that I would not look away. It was the only thing I had to give to her, the specific discomfort of not looking away, of being present for the consequence of what I had done, and it cost me nothing, changed to nothing, helped her in no way at all, but I was not going to take it back. She held my gaze for 3 seconds, long enough to be deliberate. Then she turned and faced the magistrate, and the rest of it ran its course. She maintained her innocence throughout in that same clear voice, not frantically, with the same steady directness that was apparently the thing inside her nothing could reach. Not 4 months of imprisonment, not the full weight of that court and that room. She said she had not done the things she was accused of. She asked them to look at the evidence rather than the testimony of children. The magistrate asked her why she was tormenting the afflicted. She said she was not tormenting anyone. The girl screamed. She was convicted before sundown. The execution was in September, on a clear morning with sharp blue sky and light coming straight down without any softness. I did not have to go. No official role required my presence on that hill. Every justification for staying home was available to me. I went anyway, because some part of me still functioning as a person insisted that if I have done this thing, I had to witness all of it. That turning away at the moment of consequence was one cowardice too many. Anna came up the hill with her wrist bound. She walked steadily, 1 foot from the next, each step placed with deliberateness. The walk of a woman who had decided to arrive at that row on her own terms rather than be dragged to it. At the top, she spoke. She said she was innocent, in that voice, the same one I had heard through the wall between our houses for 11 years, clear and direct and entirely ours, as though she had decided that consistency was the last thing that belonged only to her, and she was going to hold on to it until the end. Then the rope was set. She dropped. The sound the crowd made in that moment is something I had turned over many times in 50 years, trying to place it correctly. Not a cheer. These people did not cheer. This was solemn necessary work in their understanding, but not silent either. The collective exhale, the sound of hundreds of people releasing a breath that had been holding, carrying it in both the relief of something finished and the weight of what finishing it had required. Then ordinary sounds came back. Somewhere below the hill, a horse shifting on the road. Anna was gone. The sky above that hill was the same blue it had been all morning. I stood there long after the crowd began to leave, until the hill was nearly empty, and the September light had shifted and she had been dead, perhaps 20 minutes, and the world had continued exactly as it always does when something ends that seemed like they should stop everything. Then I walked home, past her house, the clay pot still on the windowsill, the herbs still growing in the afternoon light. Nobody had told them what happened on the hill. The court eventually collapsed that October, not from conscience, but from overreach. The accusations had climbed far enough up the social order to reach people with the power and the means to push back in ways that Hannah and the others had never had. When the wife of the colony's governor was named among the accused, the proceedings encountered a resistance they could not simply override, and what seemed unstoppable for 9 months suddenly stopped. The remaining accused were released from jail. The colony eventually held a day of public repentance for what had been done. The legislature eventually passed a bill restoring the names and reputations of those convicted. Families of the executed were eventually compensated. Eventually, years after the dead were already dead, nobody came for me, no reckoning, no moment where someone stood in a public room and pointed back. The community moved forward the way communities move forward after the terrible things they do, not by facing them fully, but by covering them with enough ordinary days that the shape of the thing becomes less visible from the surface. I moved forward with it, went to church, nodded in the road, watched the seasons change over the windowsill next door, now tended by different hands, growing different herbs, just different herbs, not hers. I'm 81 years old now. Anna had been dead for 50 years, and I've thought about her every single day of those years, not at significant moments, not dramatically, just present the way a smell stays in a room long enough after its source has gone. September is the hardest, when the hair turns, and somewhere nearby someone dries the last of their summer herbs, and the smell drifts through an open window, close enough to lavender, that something in me goes immediately back to that hill. Her walking up the path with her wrist bound, her eyes finding mine across a courtroom and staying for 3 seconds, her voice saying she was innocent, which she was, which I knew from the moment I said her name, which I have known every single day since. I said her name to stay alive, and she went to that hill steadier and braver and more herself than I have been in any moment of the 50 years I have lived since. Nobody punished me. The sun kept rising every morning. Bread still needed making. People still needed nodding to in the road. I carried it. The carrying never got lighter the way you tell yourself it eventually will. It just became more familiar, more woven into the texture of ordinary days. Underneath everything, always waited, always there. I wake up now, I make bread. The September air comes through the window sometimes, and Hannah is in the room with me. Every time, after 50 years, still here.